Hello, everyone. Before we dive into today's episode, I wanted to remind you that my book, Drummers on Drumming, is available now on Amazon as both a paperback and an ebook. Based on the Big Fat 5 segment of this podcast, where I sit down with my favorite drummers to discuss the 5 records and stories that shaped their approach to the instrument, this book is packed with insights from the drummers who redefined how we think about the modern drum set. You can grab your copy now by checking the link in this episode's show notes or simply searching Drummers on Drumming on Amazon. So thank you for all the support, and now let's get into the show. What is up? Welcome back to Drummers on Drumming, a podcast powered by Big Fat Snare Drum. My name is Ben Hilzinger, and today's episode is a little different. So a few months ago, I was sent a book by drummer and educator Mark Feldman, founder of Bang the Drum School, and the book is called Drumming Decoded: The Secret Code to Quickly Go from Newbie to Confident Drummer. It's a relatively quick read at around 180 pages, but it's surprisingly comprehensive. And so with this podcast, I try to steer clear of too much insider baseball because I want to have everyone feel like they're a part of the conversation. That being said, I've also realized I haven't really addressed beginner drummers directly in a lot of my content. So I brought Mark on the show to not only promote his book, which I do recommend, link in the show notes, but also have a conversation about building a solid foundation from day one. And while this book and conversation are definitely geared toward novice drummers, there's a ton of takeaways that can help any drummer, no matter where you're at in your journey. So whether you've just picked up sticks and stumbled across this episode, or you're revisiting the fundamentals like I do quite often, I hope you dig this episode. Even if you think you've heard it all before, you might just grow a little more. So here's to beginners. Keep going, y'all. You got this. Cheers. Well, before we dive into your book and the 5 pillars of drumming and beyond that, can you give my audience a quick little overview of your drumming journey and then how you came to found Bang the Drum School?
Yeah, I've been a drummer most of my life. I grew up in New York City, which is a great place to grow up if you're a musician or want to be a musician. So I started taking lessons right away. I found this teacher in New York named Charlie Davidman, who was wonderful and was really good and knew what he was doing. I got really lucky in that way. And I started playing as soon as I could. While I was in high school, I was playing in bands with people who were at least twice my age, I think, maybe older. And then I kept going. I had a couple of little breaks here and there. I went to college, somewhere or other. I went to business school, believe it or not. So I have this interesting mix, I think, of like business and creative, which there's definitely a bunch of people who are like that. I don't know, there's like a small brotherhood of drummers who also are good at business. And so I tried to mix the two together, honestly, in the beginning, just to survive, you know? So as a drummer, you know, I did well in New York. I played with some people that people would know, like I played with Marshall Crenshaw. I was in a band on A&M Records called Hearts and Minds. You know, I got recommended for gigs by Kenny Aronoff. Like I got into a circle of places where like I was doing all right. And most recently I had my own band called Mark Feldman's Level 5. And when I recorded that, I got Will Lee to play bass and Osnoy to play guitar, and Adam Klippel to play keyboards, which I don't know if you know him. But all of those people are incredible musicians. It was like a dream band for me. So I was like, okay, I hope I can play good enough to be in my own band. And we put an EP out called the Sybil EP. And so that's sort of like, of all the sessions I've done or bands I've been in, like I'm kind of proud of that record because it's sort of, here's some of the stuff that Mark can do, or this is the kind of music Mark likes to play. And he gets to play it with these great musicians. Yeah.
Well, and so your book, Drumming Decoded: The Secret Code to Quickly Go from Newbie to Confident Drummer, even if you don't have a drum set. And so you kind of state in the book that your mission statement is to help beginners feel seen. So who exactly is the book for? And maybe walk us through a few of the different types of drummers it aims to help.
Well, like you said correctly, the intention with my teaching business has always been to help beginners, because I feel that they're overlooked in the drumming education community. And I sort of stumbled upon it by mistake when I opened Bang the Drum School in New York City as a teaching studio that was in person, because naturally the people who found me on Google were mostly beginners. And I noticed that people around me who were also offering to teach people, they seemed to think about more complicated things, like when they were promoting their school or their education services, they were talking about things that were kind of too high level. And I have a theory about why beginners are overlooked. And the theory is, it's not fun for a lot of drummers to teach beginners, because there are a lot of drummers who are like, oh, that's no fun, man. I don't want to play goom, gat, doom, doom, gat, goom, gat. I want to play all this crazy fusion stuff and chops, but that's not what beginners need. Beginners need all this very foundational stuff. And as soon as I realized that people were overlooking it, it became a big business opportunity, besides the fact that it was something that made me happy, because I remember being a beginner, and I remember before I found my first drum teacher not knowing what to do, but really wanting to play the drums so badly, but not knowing what to do at all. And I needed guidance, and I've always believed in getting guidance for whatever it is that you want to excel at, because I always feel that you'll excel faster or learn faster that way. It never makes sense to me to try to figure things out all on your own. Mm-hmm. So the beginner thing was natural, but it was something that I feel really proud of, and I think it's an important thing, because that's how you bring people in to the world of drumming, is help the people where they are. So mostly it's for beginners, as stated, but there are some people who, like drum teachers, who have told me that they're using some of the ideas in their teaching, and there are some intermediates who thought that my technique teaching was helpful because I drilled down really deeply in it. But it is for beginners. So if you're like, I don't know what to do, there's too many videos, I can't, who can I trust? People are overwhelmed. And the point of this book is to like give a thread where you're like, okay, if I want to learn to play drums, all I have to do is read this book and I'll understand what to do. That's what I wanted the book to do.
Absolutely. And I don't consider myself a beginner. I've been a professional drummer for 15 years now. But when I read the book, like you were talking about drum teachers, there's still a lot of stuff in there that is, sometimes I was like, oh my God, that does just explain a concept that I've been searching for so long. And it helped me as well. So, and in no way am I an expert, but I really enjoyed your book.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Well, and then moving on to chapter 4, I'm not sure, it is kind of, I don't want to spoil the book for people, but there is a critical practice concept that you talk about that I think was the biggest takeaway for me in the book. Did you want to talk about that critical practice concept?
You mean little chunks of mastery?
Little chunks of mastery, yes.
Yeah, I think it's an overlooked idea. And it basically comes from the notion that when you have a page of exercises in front of you as a musician or as a drummer, if there's 25 exercises on the page, the idea of achieving something or getting it done is so ingrained in humans now that you want to get to the end. And that means you want to get through all 25 exercises. And that implies that you might go fast and that you might feel like you really reached the goal once you got through all of them. But the problem with that is it creates a psychology of shallowness in the learning. Because to go deep in your learning, you need to master each thing that you do before you go to the next thing. And that's all little chunks of mastery means. Don't skip from exercise 1 to exercise 2 after you can sort of play exercise 1 half-assed. But really crush it and then get to the next one and then crush that one. And then, so what if you only learn 4 of them in a day? You know, practicing is a lifelong thing. So it means slow down and just really absorb, master each thing before you go to the next thing. Otherwise, you're just wasting your time. That's what, and I think a lot of people practice that way, which I think is unfortunate. And if they would go deeper, I think they would get better faster. I gave it that name when I was writing the book because I needed a way to describe it. But I've been playing for a really long time. And I think at some point in my 20s, I started figuring it out because when I wanted to improvise something, it wouldn't work. And I was like struggling to reach into myself for the ideas and the vocabulary I'd been working on to come out. And the reason why it wasn't coming out, I figured out, was because I didn't know it well enough. And like the way you and I talk right now, I use language as a good, I think it's one of the best analogies for how you improvise. Because when you and I are talking right now, we're putting together these words that we already know in a specific way to impart the meaning we want to impart, but we're doing it off the top of our head. I'm speaking extemporaneously right now, as you have been. So it works the same way in drumming and music. It's just a different kind of a word, and it could be a lick or a concept of some way of using a pattern or how you connect things together, and all that stuff has to be so deeply mastered before it's useful. And I think that's how I figured it out, because I was like, oh, I have a 2-bar break in this band, let me play something. And I would be like just playing like some technical thing, not the cool thing that I'd been working on. Maybe I was just blast a 6-stroke roll for a while, and that's okay, but it wasn't creative. And so that's how I figured it out, by my own error or my own shortcomings.
And in chapter 5, I mean, just kind of going through the book, I made all my lists and stuff as I was reading it. So you do talk about a reality check.
The chapter is called The Catch. And basically it means that you have to practice a lot. And the reason why I put it in there is, in the world we live in and the kind of marketing that people do marketing in these ways that sometimes people downright lie to sell their stuff. And sometimes people exaggerate. But in marketing, the idea is always to tell somebody, I'm going to give you this, but you won't need to do this. That's like a marketing formula. Mm-hmm. You could become a great drummer, but you won't really have to practice. And that's nonsense. And I talk about it from the perspective, I think, of what person who's a master at anything got there without working really hard for a long time. That whole 10,000 hours thing, it's not mythology. The mythology is you can practice 10 minutes a day and get good. And I've seen actual people say things like that in their marketing, and I won't name names. So
I want
just
names, numbers, Social Security.
But I want to be, again, it's about trust, like giving stories of people who I've worked with and what happened. And I don't want, I want people to buy my stuff, but if I'm honest with you, you're going to feel more comfortable with me than if I'm, trying to tell you something that's sort of not true in order to get you to buy my stuff. That's one of my things in this book, is I wanted to lay out the truth as I know it. And the hardest part about it is you have to practice really hard for a really long time to get really good, and there's no way around it. And that's what the catch is. That's what chapter 5 is about.
I want to take a quick second to shout out Shure's Nexodyne series of dynamic microphones. Unlike typical dynamics that use a single transducer, Nexodyne mics feature Shure's patented Revonic dual engine technology, which basically means that there are two transducers working together, with one wired out of phase to cut down on unwanted noise. Shure sent me a few to try out, one snare, two tom mics, and a kick mic. And honestly, the timing was perfect because I had to record an audition video. And without getting too geeky, these things cut down on a lot of bleed. The tom mics barely picked up the cymbals and had this pre-EQ'd quality that just sat right in the mix. The snare had shockingly low hi-hat bleed, and the kick was massive but punchy, almost like you had two mics. And it was ready to go. So these are clip them on and press record kind of mics. And just to be clear, they didn't pay me to say this, and I'd never endorse anything I didn't actually believe in. So, long story short, the audition asked for clarity and tone in the recording, and despite my drumming, I got the gig. So thanks to Shure's Nexodyne series, and that's not me just making up a story for this ad. It really did happen. So they're all under $300, and check them out at shure.com. That's SHURE.com. And I mean, come on. These are the people that made the SM57, the SM58, the 7B. They made the microphone I'm talking into right now. So check out the Nexodyne series at shure.com. To track back a little bit, I want people to read the book, so I don't want to give away everything. But you talk about a bunch of hurdles. And with this podcast, I try not to get too insider baseball with everything. But I'll be the first to admit that maybe I don't talk to beginners as much. And I know for a fact some of my students listen to this podcast. So I want to make sure that we are still talking to them. So if someone does think like, well, I don't have that natural talent, what is your response to that?
My response to that is that science shows that natural talent, with the possible exception of certain physical things like twitch muscles, like there are certain people who can do certain fast things with their hands that other people can't do. Mm-hmm. Like, you know Yanni Mater?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so that guy is insane and wonderful, and the technical things he can do are extraordinary. And I have some of his teaching materials, and for the life of me, I can't get push-pull to work any faster than I can just fingers in French grip going in the same direction. Mm-hmm. And I've worked on it for hours and hours and hours. And so I think, now, it would be interesting what Yanni thinks about this, because he might say, no, you're wrong, anybody can learn push-pull. But there are certain physical feats in drumming that I think, and as in athletics, certain people can run faster than other people, and that's natural talent based on how your physical body was created that you can't control. Besides that kind of natural talent, I don't believe in natural talent when people say things like, oh man, that guy doesn't have the beat in him, or, oh yeah, he just doesn't have a steady time, you got to be born with that, or that guy's just not musical, he wasn't born with it. And I think all of that is complete and utter bullshit. I think that anybody who wants to learn any of those things can learn them. Those are all learnable skills, and you just have to understand how to go about learning them. And everything else there's no such thing as talent when it comes to drumming. And, John Riley talks about this when he talks about the gift. And I think I write about that in the book. The gift is your ability to focus on something for a long time and keep at it and do it just because you like it. And that's how you get good. That's the gift. The gift is immersing yourself deeply into the art form.
And what do you say to, because I have recently been diagnosed with ADHD, which is very freeing to me because I can now know how my brain works, how I can set up things for a certain amount of times because I only have a certain amount of focus. How do you talk to students who, some of them have 8 hours a day to practice, some of them have 15 minutes a day? How do you navigate just the way certain people actually digest information? Do you have different methods for that, or do you have a a theory behind that? Different students, different brains?
Yeah, I think that you try a bunch of different ways. It'd be interesting to hear how you do this with your students. I've come up with a few ways of teaching certain things that people find extremely difficult in the beginning. And again, this is in the book also. I call it the vertical independence method. And the vertical independence method just takes each note one by one, and you play all of the limbs associated on that note together. And then you go to the next one. So for example, the easiest rock beat example is doont dats, doont dats. So you have eighth notes on the hi-hat, you have 1 and 3 on the bass drum, and 2 and 4 on the snare drum. So there's really only 4 steps to learning that, right? Because it's the same 4 steps repeated. So step number 1 is hi-hat and bass drum, step number 2 is hi-hat, step number 3 is hi-hat and snare drum, and step number 4 is the same as step number 2, just hi-hat. And that's the kind of thinking I get my students to do to learn independence. Go one line at a time and do exactly what's on that line together, and then do the next one. And then you can't fail. But other teachers do this stuff where they're like, okay, now play eighth notes. Okay, you got that going? Okay, good. Okay, now play the bass drum on 1 and 3. Oh, that's hard. Oh, now play the snare drum on the E of 2. I mean, it's just like, it's like jumping on a train that's already rolling down the track. It doesn't make any sense to me to teach that way, but there are people who teach like that. So I tried to come up with different ways to break things down into the smallest, most logical chunk so that anybody could learn it. Because independence is one thing that people have the hardest time with in the beginning. And using this vertical independence method, I've had students freak out like, oh my God, I can do it. Finally, I can do it. Thank you so much. And it's like, oh, that's so cool. Like that I was able to help that person do that thing. And then because in the beginning, when there's stuff like that going on, sometimes people will give up, right? Because if you can't get the basic independence to play beats, then you can't really be a drum set player. So that's just one example, but I've talked so long about this one example that I should just be quiet now. But you understand as a teacher,
yeah,
there's lots of ways to get people to look at things, and you just got to try different ways until the different students latch onto one of them.
Yeah, my biggest, and it's a self-imposed prison that I put myself in, but I have to balance this. I want them to be interested and excited, but I also want them, because sometimes, as you know, as a teacher, some of the stuff I'm like, God, we really need to focus on this, but this might be really boring for you for the next 2 or 3 months. And so it's like you have to convince them to still want to come back, be excited, but also we have to do this. And balancing, sometimes you do the stuff that's up here, like you were talking about, because that's what gets them excited and the way their brain, oh my God, I want to get to this point. But it's like, but we really should just focus on how your relationship is with your fulcrum for 3 months. And it's hard to balance that. It's a teacher's biggest anxiety nightmare. How do you deal with that?
I deal with it by not being too rigid in my approach. So I think of it like, yeah, there are certain things, like you hit the nail on the head. The technical stuff, in theory, is the most boring and the most intricate and the kind of stuff that makes you really tired, that you're thinking about all these tiny, tiny details. And then if you have to correct a detail that's wrong, it's even worse.
Oh,
it's
my
so
God.
hard. And so it's very difficult, but it's also possibly the most rewarding thing in drumming, because when you can sit down at a pad or a snare drum and play something with your hands that's interesting just because of the technical ability you have, that's like a magical feeling. Like, I thank the stars above that if I want to sit down with my practice pad, I can play stuff and it's just like, woo! ooh, that sounded really cool. Like you can excite yourself or you can play for people. And it's not, I don't want to brag. I don't mean it that way. I just mean that it's so delightful to have that feeling. But the way I get around it is, well, first I try to convince people of the delight of the feeling that they will have, right? Like I just talked about. But then the other thing is just I give people candy, drumming candy. And the drumming candy I give them usually is like some kind of fill or some kind of lick that they could learn kind of quickly that sounds really cool on the drums that they can whip out sometime. In particular, like hand-foot ideas are good like that because a lot of people don't know how to play those things, and those are easier to learn than people might think. And fills excite people a lot, especially in the beginning. So that's what I do. I give them fills, and that's the candy.
Candy's good. Candy's good. Well, so let's talk about the 5 pillars. And again, I want to stress, even if we go over this stuff, please pick out the book because I got a lot from it. But I did want to talk about the 5 pillars of drumming. And so the first one, reading. Why won't you teach someone who's unwilling to learn how to read?
If the person doesn't want to learn how to read, then it's going to be so much harder. And I don't want to do it. It's not effective. And I also feel like, in a way, it's disrespectful, not to me necessarily as a teacher, but it's disrespectful to the art form. Because if you understand how important and critical learning to read is for your understanding of how the instrument works, and for the efficiency with which you can learn to play the instrument because of understanding the reading. If you understand that and you're not willing to learn the reading, then I'm not the right teacher for you. You know? I believe in reading for the same reason that and again, I'll come back to the language analogy, and I write about this in the book. And this is what I would say to someone who doesn't want to learn how to read and wants to learn to play music. What would happen if you went to your foreign language teacher, or if you wanted to learn a new language, and you came in and they said, okay, now we're going to learn how to read and write this new vocabulary in French. And you said, I'm not doing that. I don't want to do that. And they'd be like, what? Like, it's the same thing. Like, do you want to be illiterate?
You have to do it. You know, I get it. There's the people that I'm sure, Paul McCartney doesn't know how to read music. Okay. There's obviously the exceptions to the rule, but.
Yeah. Dennis Chambers and Buddy Rich, right, famously don't know how to read. And I've had people say that to me before. They don't know how to read. So, hey, man, Buddy Rich doesn't know how to read. I don't have to learn. And I'm like, yeah, but he was like the best drummer in the world who ever lived. Are you going to compare yourself to him and use him as a reason why you're not going to read? That's absurd.
Yeah. It's also like you hear those stories about all these guys, and I would beg to differ that, I mean, Buddy Rich is no longer with us, but I would assume that Dennis and Paul McCartney, if you showed them some pretty, even elementary music theory notation, I think at this point they probably know how to read that stuff now. You know, I would assume, but maybe I'm wrong.
Well, I don't disagree, and I think that it sort of reminds me of the notion that sometimes people, to appear more like a superhero of their instrument to other mere mortals, they might exaggerate certain things to lift their status. And Buddy did that. So Buddy used to talk about how he didn't practice very much. And now maybe he didn't because he played all the time.
Sure.
You know? And Dennis talks about playing all the time too. But you can't learn to play like that with that kind of hands and not have practiced. I don't buy it.
Me neither.
If you can play like that, you have spent a lot of time practicing. I'm sorry. I don't believe it.
Mm-hmm. And pillar 2, so technique, and we've kind of talked about this, but if you have a student that comes in that goes, all right, Mark, I want to read music, I want to be a better drummer, but this is how I hold my sticks, let's move on. I don't want you to change me at all. Why is it so important to get good technique?
Well, this is an interesting problem, because I bet you've faced this as well. There are sometimes people who have been playing long enough that they have some ingrained muscle memory things with the way their technique works. And in some cases, you might look at it and go, well, that's not correct. Like the angle should be like this. And I guess the way I try to express these things is, look, there's more than one way to skin a cat. There are lots of people who have really great technique who hold the sticks in different ways. And it's not universal, but there are some universal things, I believe, like a looseness in grip and a relaxation of your hands, wrists, arms, and body, and balance, physical balance when you sit at the drum set on the throne, and being able to get the stick to bounce if you want. Because contrary to popular belief, you don't always play with the stick bouncing. There are lots of times when you don't bounce a stick, and you do that on purpose to get a certain sound. But I don't try to force people to change their technique because you can't. You can't force people to do it. But what I do try to do is offer them an option. And this is something, I think I learned this from studying with John Riley. John Riley would say to me, when I went to him about my ride cymbal technique.
It's a good guy to go to for that.
Yeah, I figured, like I said, I believe in getting help. And so when I want help, I try to get the best possible help I can. And I figured he would know the answer, and he did. But when he saw what I was doing, which I knew there was a problem with it, he didn't say, you have to do it this way. He said, Mark, I see what you're doing, and I think it might be more helpful to your ability to do this the way you want if you tried this instead. And that's my approach. Because I like John. In my opinion, John has the right to say, you are doing it all wrong. You should do it this way. And if you don't do it this way, you're not going to get it right. Like, that guy's earned the right to say that, but he doesn't, because he's a good soul, a gentle person, a wise teacher. I think of John Riley as the Yoda of drumming. Mm-hmm. And that's because if you ask him any question about drumming, he's always known the answer to every drumming question I've ever asked him. But his gentle way of offering a solution without being forceful or aggressive about it, I think goes a long way in getting students to see the light, so to speak, of a way of doing something that might be better than the way they're currently doing it.
Mm-hmm. All right, so the third pillar is independence. Why independence? What's so important about it?
Because you cannot do your primary job as a drummer if you don't develop that skill, right? Because the primary job of us as drummers is to play grooves behind people. Whatever the genre, the grooves might be different. And the kind of independence will be different in different genres. And at the most basic level, in rock and pop, and I don't say basic in a way to denigrate it, just because it is pretty much arguable that that's the easiest type of independence to develop, because it's all very linear and straight. Mm-hmm. So if you can't do that, you can't be a drummer. So it has to be on the list.
You go to groove is the fourth pillar, and I mean, this is the most esoteric thing ever, and it's really hard to talk about, but what separates, in your opinion, playing in time and then actually having a groove?
Well, playing in time goes a long way to having a groove. Benny Greb has his teaching, his DVD about groove, and where he puts forth that the same thing that I believe, which is that it's a learnable skill. It's not that talent thing. It's not just in you. But playing in time is the most important part of it, honestly, because you can't hypnotize people with the groove, the repetitive groove, because really that, to me, is what groove is about, is being able to put people under a spell with your hypnotic repetition that makes you tap your foot or nod your head. And if you can't play really, really steady time, generally speaking, you're not going to be able to do that. But beyond that, there are all these other details that when you put them all together can make you sound amazing and have a good pocket. And some of them people don't think about, but one of them is understanding your subdivisions perfectly so that when you play the fourth note of a group of 4/16 notes, say the on your bass drum in a groove, that it's placed in the exact right spot. And if it's not placed in the right spot, it messes with the groove. And that goes for every subdivision in anything that you're playing. You have to understand and you have to practice your ability to put the notes in the exact right places for the subdivisions you're working in. And then another one is just the interaction of your voices on the drum set and how the relative volumes work. So I think of it as you are your own recording engineer with your body. You're mixing your drums. You have to control the different volumes of your cymbal hand, your left hand, your right hand, and your foot. You have to control the volumes of those so that it sounds right. And if you don't understand the appropriate volumes, or you technically don't realize that you're playing something too loud, the typical thing with beginners is to play the hi-hat too loud. I think you have to be able to hear something and understand when something sounds good or not, and then be able to hear if you're reproducing that or not. So there's a listening skill there, and your ability to perceive if you're doing something the same or close to the same as the person you're trying to imitate did it.
Mm-hmm. And the last pillar is vocabulary, and it might seem like a basic one. We've talked about it before, but how do you navigate? The tricky part is some people, like that candy you were talking about before. At what point do you recommend students turn off the faucet of more vocabulary and just know how to talk in the more basic, straightforward way at the beginning? Does that make sense?
The truth is, I don't ever think you can have enough vocabulary, really. But I think that if you're a beginner and we assume that your goal is to play with other people and be able to make music, then I believe that the first order of business is to learn whatever are the appropriate fills for that kind of music first, so that you can sound good playing the chosen style of music that you want to be involved in. And you can learn more and more vocabulary, but this is where having good taste comes in, or musicality comes in. And I was guilty of not having this early in my playing days, where I was like, yeah, I'm gonna play this fucking cool lick that I learned. And I was like, no, dude, that sounds stupid there. What you really should play is dak dak dak-a-doom, goom, gat, goom. You know? Like, I've seen some videos of Jim Riley talking about this kind of stuff. You gotta learn the easy, basic fills, because if you play those fills with conviction, they sound great. And that's, I think, the problem, is that people are like, oh, that's so easy. And it's like, yeah, but let me hear you play it. You know? Can you play it like the way John Robinson plays it? Can you play it like Sean Pelton plays it? There are certain players who play very simply much of the time, who work all the time. And if you go hear Sean Pelton play live, he plays with such confidence and conviction that it's mind-blowing. And I've seen Andy Newmark live. When Andy Newmark played live, it was just like, man, he played really simple, but it was just blow you away, because he played with such confidence. This is where the groove is. This is the right fill for this section. This is when I go to the bell. I'm right. this is the way it should be. I'm exaggerating a little for
Sure.
humor's sake, but that's what it's like to see those great drummers. They exude confidence because they know how that music works, and so they know how to play the right simple fill in the right place, and it's powerful when it's used correctly and played well and confidently. So I went off on a tangent there, but
Hey, this
that's
is a
my 2
podcast.
cents
We
on
love
that.
tangents. Well, I mean, you talked about taste. So how do you, and this is a tough question, but how do you as a teacher make sure that you're cultivating that in your students? Because that is a very hard thing to do. I mean, there's some, as I'm sure you know from your years in the business, there are some people you see play and you're like, man, you said no to a lot of party invites. You're one of the best drummers I've ever seen, but you are not musical in the slightest. How do people work on that?
Well, first they have to realize that truth. And if they don't accept that as a truth, then they can't change, right? So there has to be some experience for a person like that where something happened that was something they didn't want to happen that made them realize. And for me, I've had a couple of experiences like that where there was a band that I think I write about this in the book. There was a band I really, really wanted to play with in New York, and I had the opportunity to play with them. It was in between. One of their drummers got a gig with like a really big artist, and it was like I was friends with a bunch of them, and I went and I played all this stupid, busy stuff that was like Steve Gadd and like complicated. Not that Steve Gadd plays complicated all the time, but on some fusion records he does.
Yeah.
So I played, I don't know why I did it. To this day, I still am mad at myself for that. That gig was mine, and I gave it away because I was immature, and it must have been ego or something. It's like, all I had to do was play really simply like everything I was just explaining to you. And so this is how I discovered it, was through that experience. It was like, all right, Mark, see what happened? Now play gigs with people and don't ever do that again. So I don't want to say that something bad has to happen to you, but maybe it does.
I mean, it's always better to have the people turn around and say, hey, you can have more fun than, hey, you want to lay back a little bit? Those are two very different notes.
Right. And that's funny that you say that, because that's more of what's happened to me after I made that choice to be more tasteful and to not play so much stuff. Was people would go, because maybe people, if they really know you're playing, they may know that you can actually do, there's a lot more under the hood, than is being shown. And that, so they're like, go, hey man, do you want to like do a little something here for like 2 bars or whatever? And then it's like, okay, cool, I can do something. It still doesn't mean that you should play all the Dave Weckl licks.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. You're so right. It's better to have someone ask you to play more than to tell you to stop playing so much stuff. And thanks for saying what you said about the book. That, I mean, if it can help people who aren't beginners, that's great too. There's a chapter on practicing where I talk about how do you decide what to work on. And if you're intermediate or, say, not a beginner and you're a little further along, one interesting way of looking at how to spend your time is, well, what's my weakest link? And you can use the 5 pillars of drumming to think about that. Like, okay, well, let's see, my reading, does that need work? My technique? And usually there'll be one where you can be like, I really should work on this. And then you can devote your time. It's a logical thing to spend time eliminating a weakness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's always good to go back to the beginning too, because like I tell a lot of my students, practice doesn't make perfect, practice makes permanent. So if you are doing things at a tempo that you can't play it, it's actually, you're doing a disservice to yourself. You're actually going backwards if you keep repeating it and you can't do it. Slow down, because you're teaching your body to do it incorrectly. I'd rather you not play drums than play something at a tempo you can't do it and then just hammer it out.
I agree. And that reminds me of a very similar idea, which is there's certain technical practice that will harm your progress. And it's almost the same thing as what you just said, but if you don't pay attention to the physicality of your hands and wrists and fingers and stuff, particularly if you're trying to change something in your technique, it's easy to slide back into the original way without you really understanding that happened. And so I tell a story in the book about a student I had who was like, I'm going to fix this technical thing that you showed me. I'm going to change that angle of this or whatever it was. And then they went and practiced in front of the TV every night for like 2 hours. And then they came back and they were exactly the same as when they left. And they go, I practiced this many hours, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, oh, well, you don't really look like any better. I was like, how? And then I asked them to give me more details about the practicing. And then you discover, well, they were watching TV. Well, so what happened was you didn't pay attention to the physicality of the movement you were trying to change, and nothing changed. So what happened was he got more ingrained into the wrong thing by doing that, which is not helpful. You could argue it's harmful.
Well, and this kind of goes back to you talking about the catch, is that some people, they're like, well, it makes practice so much easier if I can have a metronome on and I can have the office in the background and I can just tell myself, well, it's fun because I'm watching, I'm laughing, but it's like sometimes the hard work is, and this with me with ADHD is even harder, is you in the pad, you shut out everything else. And then, yeah, it might be hard and boring and maybe you have to take a 5-minute break every 15 minutes, but if you can actually get in there, it really does matter. And sometimes it fucking sucks and it's hard and it's boring and it's mentally strenuous and you're thinking about, you want to check your Instagram or check your email, but it's really important to focus.
Yeah, that's one of the 16 principles.
Yeah.
I mean, I agree with you completely. I can't remember in years and years and years, I don't know if I ever practiced in front of the TV or not. I would always do that thing that you're talking about where you just go and, focus on the pad in your hands and all the details of what you're working on. And the thing is that when you do that kind of focus, it makes the time fly by, actually, I think. Mm-hmm. It makes it enjoyable to really be fully engaged in something that you're doing or working on, whatever it is, even if it's writing something or thinking about something, you get lost. So it's enjoyable to really lose yourself in something.
I think I've taken up enough of your time. I want people to go buy the book. And on the way out, where can people learn more about Bang the Drum School? And then where can they buy the book and all that jazz?
Well, Bang the Drum School is it's an easy URL to remember. It's bangthedrumschool.com. And if you go there, you'll see what the school is about. And it's an online school now. So there's courses and stuff, but it's all geared towards beginners and there's no subscriptions. So I wanted that to be a thing because I don't like subscriptions and I think there are a bunch of people who don't. And then if you want to go directly to the book, you can just go to drummingdecoded.com and that's where you can find every detail about the book and buy a copy if you want. So those are the two places to go.
All right, Mark. Well, you have a great day, man. Have a good weekend, and I'll talk to you soon, man.
All right. Take care. Thanks.
Cheers, Mark.
Bye.
And that's the show. If you're listening on a platform that allows ratings and reviews, do that. It helps more people find the show, so it'll get bigger and better, and hopefully I'll have a chance to sell out one day. But you'll be an OG listener that can brag to all your friends. Anyways, why don't you go and check us out at bigfatsnaredrum.com and follow us on all the socials. Just search for Big Fat Snare Drum and you will find us. The show is edited in part using Isotope RX Audio Editor. It's amazing, so go check that out at isotope.com. And thanks again to Gunnar Olsen for the theme music. Bye!